All right, welcome listeners to our penultimate episode of the season and our last regular episode. And today we have a very special treat for you. This is our season feature of a Nicolas Cage film, which I intend to make a tradition for every single season. Have to get sneak Nicolas Cage in there once. And this time it worked out really well because there's a new 2023 film called Renfield starring Nicolas Cage, actually starring two Nicolases, which we'll talk about in a second. This is directed by Chris McKay, who did the Lego movie, I guess. Didn't have much horror stuff in his repertoire. We'll get to that. And starring Nicholas Hoult, Nicolas Cage, and Awkwafina. Okay. In this... I'm on video.
I'm going to leave that in.
You should. Well, bloopers at the end. In this modern monster tale of Dracula's loyal servant, Renfield, the tortured aide to history's most narcissistic boss, is forced to precede his master's prey and do his every bidding, no matter how debased. But now, after centuries of servitude, Renfield is ready to see that there's life outside the shadows of the Prince of Darkness, if only he can figure out how to end his codependency on Dracula. So this got a 6.4 on Internet Movie Database and 57% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's the critic score, and 79% audience score.
I just shook my head at the 6.4. Like, did they see the same movie that I did?
I know. I feel like you and I are going to have quite different opinions. All the reviews I've watched of this too have been pretty positive.
Yeah.
Anyways, This was a film that I was pretty excited for, not only because it had Nicolas Cage, but based on the trailer, I thought it looked good.
Yeah.
And the reviews that I'd seen were positive, so I went into this with pretty high expectations. I thought the film was a bit of a hot mess. Really tries to weave together a bunch of different elements that I feel like don't come together in an effective way. And it almost felt like two films squished together. So you have on the one hand, the Renfield storyline where he is trying to break his codependency on Dracula.
Yeah.
And so you have their relationship and him kind of trying to break away from Dracula. And that's sort of what I expected. But then you have this weird cop drama with corruption and mobsters. And somehow they try to marry these two things together. And for me, that's where the movie really fell apart. It felt like two very disjointed storylines that they were trying to weave together. Yeah. And for me, it just really fell apart. But what did you think of the film?
Well, I think we're on exactly the same page. Like, first of all, like we talked many times, I shouldn't have watched the trailers because my expectations were pretty high. Having watched the trailers, I thought this was going to be a fun action comedy, with light horror elements, but not really horror.
I don't think either of us were expecting a genuine horror film.
No,
here.
Not at all. But hot mess is a perfect way to describe it because, what did I say here? The tone was so uneven in the film. Like it didn't know what it was trying to be. Was this trying to be an action comedy with that horror veneer? Was it trying to be a horror comedy with some action? Although I would argue the action was so much that that kind of takes a big part of the film. But even then, it also throws in the romantic element, which I found to be a bit schlocky. The comedy bits, the parody of sort of pop psychology, I like as an idea. It went way beyond where I thought it was funny.
Yeah, it had some good ideas.
Yeah.
But you're right. It almost felt like, because I like horror comedies. I can do horror comedies or horror action. But this was action and comedy and horror. Yeah. And you really lost, I think, the horror elements. And a bit of romance as well. But for a comedy, I don't think you were, because you and I watched this together.
Yeah.
I think I laughed once, maybe twice. And they were chuckles. Where so much of the dialogue and the jokes, I feel like fell totally flat. I just wasn't. Yeah. How did you find the comedic elements of the film?
I think it relied too much for me anyway on the parody of the pop psychology stuff for the comedy. And to start with, it's kind of funny, right? You've got a self-help group, yada, yada. And it's like, okay, that's a fun element.
They started with some ska band jokes. I kind of like the ska band jokes.
So there were those, but then it just kept going. And it's like, okay, you've lost the element, because I think part of the comedy at the beginning relied on surprise. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is what we're going to parody. whether it was ska bands or whatever. Like that was actually pretty funny. But then for me, it fell flat after that because it just kept coming back to the same material and it didn't seem to be building. It didn't seem to take advantage of opportunities. I mean, Nicolas Cage is exactly what you would expect Nicolas Cage to be in this film. He is so over the top, and I think he's well suited for this film.
Yeah, I don't fault Nicolas Cage
Not
for the
at all.
problems with this movie. I thought he actually did a really good job.
He kind of plays, to me, it seemed like a Bela Lugosi kind of interpretation of Dracula. Way over the top, it was really big, and I thought that fit the part exactly. I think his performance was exactly what the film was looking for. It was all the other things around it.
Tonally, though, I felt like he was a bit awkward, not because of him, but the way he was written. He wasn't menacing enough to be feared, but he also wasn't funny enough to be funny. Like he kind of at times was menacing and maybe you felt like you're going to laugh a little bit, but they actually play him more as a horror character.
Yeah.
Whereas most of the film was going in a comedic direction. And so I feel like the scenes with Dracula felt kind of out of place. Like they didn't make him that schlocky or funny. They actually made him kind of menacing. But then tonally, it just felt like it did not work with the movie. Whereas like all the stuff with Awkwafina and the police stuff was more leaning comedy.
Yeah, like a buddy comedy, like a cop comedy. Yeah.
And just the way they tried to mix it together, for me, didn't work.
Yeah, I just feel like, I mean, this is going way back and I don't have like vivid memories of this, but there's a vampire comedy from the 80s, I think it is, called Love at First Bite. And it's, so don't try to play Dracula as a straight horror character. It's like What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah.
None of those characters are meant to be menacing.
Vampire in Brooklyn, Dracula Dead and Loving It, Buffy. There's been a lot of comedic takes on Dracula. Yeah.
And I think the difference with some of those films is the clarity of vision about what is this film trying to do. And in this case, I mean, you hit it off the top, is it doesn't know what it's trying to do. And it's just this mess of stuff that gets thrown at the screen. I mean, it's that, spaghetti on the wall thing. What's going to stick? Is a comedy going to work? Is the action going to work? I mean, I thought there were some good action sequences. There was the odd good comedy sequence. I would argue there's no good horror. It's not a horror film.
No, they don't do that. No.
Despite what they try to do with Nicolas Cage's Dracula.
I often struggle when they try to blend genres. Like I know lots of people love Wes Anderson, and I've never really liked Wes Anderson films because I don't find the comedy to be funny enough. I don't find the drama to be like engaging enough, and I just end up being lukewarm on it. And that's kind of how I felt here.
Yeah.
I also felt like the action was pretty ho-hum. There was one or two instances where I kind of laughed and like, they had a lot of fun with it and it was over the top, but a lot of it just felt like punching, slashing, throat ripping, shooting, but it felt pretty vanilla by action standards. There was lots of like CG blood, but I feel like they really could have went over the top and had a lot of fun with the action elements, but even the action elements to me didn't really work.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. Like I think where I was coming from was that the action sequences were well done, well executed.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I would agree. They're pretty vanilla. Like there was nothing special about any of the action sequences.
There's a few instances in the middle. There's a big fight scene in the middle in an apartment complex. One or two of those scenes, I felt like they hit the mark where they did some over the top stuff that was pretty funny, but you have a lot to play with like vampires and Dracula and what you could do with action. And I feel like they kind of played it pretty safe.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not comparing these two films, but I just finished watching, I believe it's Korean, The Witch, which is I think a 2022.
Oh, you're talking about that one.
It's a two-parter and it was long, but like many recent, last 4, 5, 6 years, Korean releases, so good. But interestingly, I mean, it's billed as a horror. I wouldn't call it a horror, but the action sequences were, to me, outstanding. And I just think it missed the mark on this. Like there was I think there were things that they could have done, like maybe speed ramping some of the effects, like doing something. It seemed to me a pretty big budget film.
Yes.
Based on the sequences that we saw. So do something with your budget. Like don't Don't do all the vanilla stuff. And for me, and maybe it's just that I'm not a romantic, get rid of the love interest.
Yeah.
Like, axe that whole storyline out of the film. Have Awkwafina's character there, sure, but not as a love interest or not any sparks going or whatever. And the whole thing with, oh, I'm competing with my sister and the gangsters killed my, it's like, oh my God.
Oh, and the sister thing too felt so detached from everything else. Yeah.
It was like,
you could feel you and I sitting there in the room watching it just totally flat. Like,
I was like,
like we didn't react. We weren't smiling. Like we were just kind of like staring at the screen, and you could tell, like, I was curious to hear what you were thinking of it, but I could tell from your body language that you and I were on a pretty similar wavelength.
Well, even, I don't know what, because it's not a long run time, but I remember there was about 20 minutes left and I said, what time is it? Like, how much time is left in this film? Because I was at the point where it's like, I don't know how much more of this I can take.
I got up. I was like, oh, do you want a drink? Or a new movie? Yeah. Which is too bad, because I think they really had something there with Nicolas Cage as Dracula. Like, he looked amazing. The makeup and the way they made him look was good. I think he does a really unique and interesting iteration of Dracula. But the shell that they decided to build around him as Dracula, actually, I thought Nicholas Hoult was really good too. Yeah,
I thought his performance was good, but again, it was the writing. It was what they were asking him to do as a character. Like, I think if there were things that you got rid of and focused more on, like, again, there's a brief sequence at the beginning where we get a bit of backstory. I think they could have done more with that and kind of built up over maybe once or twice for the last couple of centuries, escapades that they got into. I mean, arguably, they set the scene for why they're in this abandoned hospital, or whatever. Spoilers.
We'll do some spoilers at the end. I think there's a few things we could talk about for spoilers, but
so anyway, they do sort of set it up, like how they end up in the place they end up. But I actually really liked the opening sequence. I thought they could have done more with that, like the historical side of how they've developed this relationship, how they end up, and maybe the final act would be a modern sequence or whatever. But the modern part just dragged on too long for me.
Yeah, and it seemed like their initial premise for the film didn't suit an action movie. Like, this idea of a guy trying to break away from his codependency on Dracula feels like a comedy drama or something.
Yeah.
So then it felt like maybe they're like, oh, well, we need to come up with some way to have action elements. So let's introduce these mobsters and these cops so that we can have people for them to kill. Like, it seemed like maybe they had an initial idea and it didn't work, and they tried to tack on this second piece, and that's where it maybe really all fell apart.
And even I mentioned the love interest, but even to me, just kind of slapped on sentimentality of, Nicholas Holt's character, Renfield, talking at one point, and I think it was only one point, oh, my wife and my kid. It's like, I don't know.
And I didn't know that the director was the director who did the Lego movie. I found that out after the fact, but it almost felt like the type of comedy. And to be fair, I've not seen the Lego movie, so
I thought it was pretty good, actually.
You did? Okay. So is the comedy in the Lego movie geared towards adults, or is it geared towards, like, kids, older kids? Because the comedy in this felt like it was geared towards 13-year-olds, not towards adults. And so maybe he was using a similar mode of comedy and jokes that you would use in a Lego movie, which would be more aimed at kids.
I think that's probably accurate. Although I do find, like any good animated feature, although not on the level of Pixar, I do think the Lego movie did appeal to both, because they know parents are bringing their kids to the movie.
Right.
Pixar movies do it the best, as far like the original Toy Story, the original, like, there's lines in there that no kid's going to get, but the adults just killing themselves.
Right.
So what I don't think this movie did, Renfield didn't, was it PG? Is that maybe why?
This one?
Yeah.
I actually should look up the rating. I can't imagine with all the blood that it was PG. I would think at least PG-13 or 14A or whatever.
So I don't, it seems odd as a director that you would be appealing to both of those.
Yeah, this is not a movie I would look to bring my kids to, I don't think.
Yeah, because I think with the way they play Nicolas Cage's character, Dracula, a couple of times, I think that would be frightening for little kids especially.
Totally.
Yeah, that's a good point about the comedy, how it plays to maybe a teen or tween audience as opposed to an adult.
That's what it felt like
sensibility.
to me.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, my sense of comedy, I'm often out of touch with the shows that people find really hilarious. I often don't. And comedy is very subjective.
Yes.
But I think all the other elements, even the action, the horror, whatever drama was happening, I think it just kind of failed across the board.
Well, to me, like, it's forgivable if you've got one clear vision, but you kind of made some errors in judgment by adding a couple of things. But here, nothing is clear.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't an action film. It wasn't a comedy. It wasn't a horror. I just think it's just ill-conceived.
It's interesting because I would feel like where this film would succeed would be, this is a fun popcorn, go and have a good time with the action comedy. But that's what I was expecting. Is that what you were expecting?
Yes.
So it's interesting that we went in expecting that experience, and I still didn't feel like it delivered that either.
Well, and I think, again, like I mentioned right off the top,
Like, it wasn't fun to me.
No, again, great job for cutting the trailers, but poor job because you create expectations that don't exist.
Yeah.
And to me, that just happens far too often, which is another good argument for not watching trailers. Like going into a film blind and having your expectations dictated to you by what you see, as opposed to what you think you're going to see.
As time has gone on, I less and less try to watch trailers. I just try to go in blind as much as possible when I can. Yeah.
And I mean, everything, I don't even know if I sought out a trailer for this, but it was just there. And I think even, what did I go see? Maybe it was Scream.
It's hard to avoid trailers when you're in theater because do I actively look away or do I watch the screen?
I think that's where I saw the trailer was in Scream 6 when I went to see it recently.
Oh, not the Justin Bieber movie that just came out?
No, okay. I must have missed that one, sadly.
Okay. Now, so we think the writing is bad. The dialogue is bad. The directing is bad. I'm curious. The look of the film is a bit also very manic to me. Like the way it was lit. Like we've got green backlighting, pink backlighting, purple backlighting, red backlighting. Like each scene had a different color palette. And then there's scenes that are outdoors that are like bright and natural. Yeah. And then there's dark underground scenes. And then his apartment, like I don't know what they were doing with the color palette in his apartment, but I also found the look of the film really distracting. It reminded me of Spiral a little bit, where again, like every scene was like a different color just because.
Right.
Did the visual elements detract? Like I kind of liked the look of his lair. Yes. And it was kind of like a mix of green and red.
Yeah.
And and they use the green and red a couple times, but then some scenes are pink and some are purple and some are orange. And like it felt like they went a bit crazy with the different lighting options.
That's a good observation. And I'm agreeing with you, although I think I was so distracted by the fact that the whole film was bad that I wasn't even focusing on specific elements. My favorite look was the lair as well.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think it was well conceived. Like it doesn't seem to me like you're going to storyboard a film. And as a director, you should have a clear idea. Like, is this going to be teal and orange? Is it going to be green and red? Is it going to be sort of a hue of blue? Like, what is this going to be?
Like Censor, I think we watched Censor.
Yeah.
You could tell the director was playing with blue and red.
Absolutely.
And certain things happen when it's blue and certain things happen when it's red. I like that. Just felt like he was on Microsoft Paint, like just picking whatever color he liked for that scene. I don't know.
Spun the wheel on Pinterest and picked a few backgrounds that he thought might work. I think Renfield's apartment is supposed to be comedic, like his wardrobe when he changes. But again, I think there are other ways that you could do that, like in the writing or in his body language or his demeanor. Like there are other ways to establish his change without altering the look of the film, or subdue it to a point where you're not changing the entire look of the film. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, again, it spoke to this idea of we're just going to take a lot of different elements and put them together, and it didn't work. Like, just like tonally, the movie doesn't really work. I felt like also the look of the film and the color palette was just very frenetic and didn't make much like cohesion.
I mean, it's always fascinating to me, and I haven't heard any behind the scenes stories, but you know how like years after a film comes out or whatever, then you hear that either there was studio meddling or there was a lot of bickering on stage, or behind the scenes. Sorry. I wonder about that when you see a film like this that seems to be so discombobulated. Like, what was happening behind the scenes, if anything, that would create that atmosphere where everything just seems to be all over the place. Like, I don't know.
And the baffling thing to me here is I feel like this is the most out of touch you and I have been with sort of popularity and critic scores, because most of the stuff I've read and watched on this film are positive. Whereas I feel like you and I are usually pretty in step with the rating. Yeah. I mean, you really love Winnie the Pooh, and that didn't get very good ratings, but otherwise I feel like we're pretty on par. So there's something about you and I that just didn't click with this film, but maybe it did work for other people.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I mean, I avoided watching anything so that it didn't bias my negative opinion of this film.
Yes.
I didn't want to be swayed to believe that it was actually good. I struggle with, like the 6.4 and the 79% audience. I just really struggle with how do you get there?
Yeah, the positive reviews seem to focus on it's like a fun romp with like lots of good action and comedy.
That's a really low bar. Like I even for those elements, it's
those didn't work for me.
Yeah, it wasn't good enough for me to say, oh yeah, well, it wasn't a horror film, which I didn't expect anyway, but it wasn't really any of those other things. So if I want a comedy, I'm going to go specifically watch something, or I'm going to watch stand-up or whatever. If I want action, I'm going to specifically go and watch something that's action-oriented.
I'm like that too. Like I want to go all in. Like when I watch comedies, I want it to be really funny, like raunchy, hilarious. I don't like the more subtle comedy, although horror comedies I can do. Same with action. Like I want it to be over the top. So maybe for you and I don't like the melding of different genres. I don't know.
I mean... Yeah, I don't know either. I just think for me, and we've discussed this with other films, horror comedy is probably the most difficult line to walk, I think. And it's not often done very well, but I have an interest and a tolerance for that if it's done well. I mean, I mentioned What We Do in the Shadows. I thought that was, really well done. And there've been other ones as well. Sorry, a total tangent. Is Nicholas Hoult the one who is in Warm Bodies? Is he the lead, the zombie guy?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. It just flashed to me. It's like, where have I seen him before? I don't really know his work. So
yeah, like he looked really familiar. I know I've seen him in things, but I wasn't immediately like, oh, it's him. It's Nicholas Hoult from X. Like I just knew I've seen him in stuff. But I thought he was really good. I think Nicolas Cage, Nicholas Hoult were great. I think their performances were good. I think they were not given the right things to do. I would blame the directing and the writing. But I liked those two characters, and maybe we can get to our recommendations before we do a bit of spoilers.
Yeah, for sure.
I would almost like a sequel to this, or like, I want to see more Nicolas Cage as Dracula. I liked Nicholas Hoult as Renfield, but I want it not in this movie. I want them to do it again. So maybe they'll do a sequel or something, and maybe they can get it right that time. But I would not recommend this movie.
Yeah.
Even as a fun popcorn action comedy, that's what we both went in expecting.
Yeah.
I still feel like it didn't deliver on that front. It's certainly not a horror. I just think it was pretty bad. Other than the main performance. So
yeah, I'm in 100% agreement. I'm way closer to the 57% critic than the 79% audience.
Definitely.
And for all the same reasons, I don't think it achieves whatever it was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fall into any genre, and it doesn't walk the line to straddle genres well enough to recommend it for me.
And there's so many masterpieces with Nicolas Cage. You could watch any number of those before you probably went and watch this one.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some good movies with Nicolas Cage, but
sure. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So that's our thought. We are not recommending this.
Not recommending.
Our season finale is our next episode.
Yes.
And we figured, since we unintentionally had a season full of found footage films, that we would do our top 10 ranked found footage films.
Ranked.
For our season finale.
Yeah, I was on the ball this time.
All right. Yeah, good job. I've converted you.
I don't like ranking, but I did rank this time. And I said to Mike before we started recording today that I second guessed myself. I don't know how many times, and I forced myself not to touch my list. It's like, is that really? But I'll talk about this more. I ranked it, but it's not necessarily from worst film to best film. It's just my experience with those films.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can stick around if you want to hear a little bit of spoiler talk for Renfield, but if you don't, then thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the aisles.
See you in the aisles. And we're going to do spoilers now, so leave if you don't want to hear spoilers. Although we've kind of spoiled most of this film already.
Yeah.
Right.
Once I had this thing spoiled for me. All right, so I think some of the only elements I liked were some of the physical comedy. Like there was the scene in the middle of the action scene in the apartment building.
Yep.
And he rips off that guy's arms.
Yeah,
He's like running around stabbing people with the arms and beating them with the arms. That scene worked for me. And I actually liked at the end when they were like killing Dracula and they were kind of making a joke of like burning him and cutting him up. And I think they grind him down into like ice cubes or something. They're putting him in trays. Right. And I thought that was funny. So I did actually laugh at the end when they're like completely dismembering Dracula in all these different ways.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect example of they went so far over the top that it is funny. Like they take it to that nth degree and you go, okay, yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah. You and I were both chuckling at the ska band.
Yeah. I mean, like those kinds of things, if you're of a certain age and you remember like, you know, the popularity of ska, it was kind of funny to see that sent up. Mm. And like I said earlier, the pre-spoiler section, you know, the pop psychology parody was funny to me to a point. And then after that point, it was like, okay, you're just beating a dead horse here. Like, it's not funny anymore.
And the thing that really pissed me off is they end up killing all those people in the support group, but then they're all magically alive at the end.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? Like, you brought them all back, which is kind of, I guess, the fun comedy bit, but that was really lame.
Yeah, that's just not funny. And it wasn't comedy.
And I did not like Awkwafina in this movie.
I did not like her character at all. It was...
Like, I thought she was terrible, like the worst part. Maybe because of the way it was written, not her performance, but...
Yeah, I don't know. It was funny because when I was looking up the cast and I saw her name, it's like, am I supposed to know this person? Is she like a music?
She does a lot of voice acting for like Disney movies and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, because I didn't know her. I didn't know her performances. But yeah, I just found the neurotic, angry, I think she's the older sister. Yeah, like however it was written, however it was conceived, it didn't come off on screen, whether that was the writing or the performance. But for me, I felt like either she didn't understand the character or the character wasn't understandable from a writing perspective, or they tried to put too much into the character.
I think that was maybe part of it. Like the subplot with her trying to rescue her sister. That part I barely even was understanding at the time. The villains are super cardboard, just generic, boring. That woman with the crazy voice.
Yeah.
But
which I mean, in a movie like this, if you have those cardboard villains or whatever, I don't fault them for that. But there wasn't enough, there weren't enough other things going on to make up for that deficit, right? Yeah. Because I think we've mentioned this, like if they had focused on, if they'd taken the romance element out with Renfield and Awkwafina's character, I don't even remember what her name was. If they had taken out the sentimental bits and focused on the relationship between Renfield and the outside world, that makes sense to me. Renfield and Dracula, that makes sense to me. But don't bring in another character like Awkwafina and then have a whole other backstory. And it just got way too complicated and everything becomes watered down at that point.
Yeah, it's actually interesting to me maybe that I feel like they actually really underutilized Nicolas Cage as Dracula.
Oh,
like, 100%. I don't feel like he had much screen time, really.
No.
I might cut out the whole Renfield thing and just make a movie starring Nicolas Cage as Dracula and make him the central character so you get more of him. Because I feel like...
we know what you think about Nicolas Cage, so I'm not sure anybody wants to see that movie, but maybe they do.
But it seems odd to have Nicolas Cage play that part, make him look so good and seem so appropriate for it, and then not really use him that well.
Yeah.
Or very much.
And yeah, I would agree with that part of your statement, is that I think, as I mentioned earlier as well, I think Nicolas Cage's approach to this character is bang on. He does that sort of Bela Lugosi thing, a little bit of an accent. I mean, it's inconsistent, but when he does it, I think it works. Sending up the traditional Dracula stereotype character. And I think there are ways that they could have made that more interesting and more funny, and gone away from make his look horrific.
Yeah.
Like
he looked horrific.
Yeah. I liked his teeth.
Mm-hmm.
I found that his look was really good. But I think, one of my notes, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, they could have leaned into the comedy more. Like,
yeah, nothing he said I found funny.
No.
I don't think I laughed at anything that Nicolas Cage said in that movie.
No.
Which is kind of what you think would be the point of having him play that character.
Yeah. And especially the way he's playing that character.
Yeah.
It seems to me it is a send up of traditional Dracula horror, sort of the B movie Draculas. Well, then lean into that and do it in a way that makes people smile. I don't know. Having said that, I wonder, is Chris McKay, the director, like, is he worried that people won't get that reference or they won't understand it? But in my mind, then don't worry about those people. Make the film for the people who get it. There's lots of films out there where the director, they become strong films because the director's not worried about the segment of the audience that doesn't get it.
Yeah.
They're focusing on the segment of the audience that does get it. Great. Then make a film for those people, have some fun, play to the people who are going to appreciate what you're doing. And this seemed like we're going to throw everything at the screen and hopefully some of it will land with some people.
Yeah. Which apparently worked.
Yeah.
It seems like it did work.
Yeah.
But not for us.
Not for us.
Yeah. I don't know, give it to Quentin Tarantino or something. Maybe he can turn it into a gem. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Have Samuel Jackson in there or something.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all I have to say about Renfield.
Yeah, I can't. I don't want to dredge up anymore.
One of these days, we're going to have a review of a Nicolas Cage film that's really good.
But that would mean there'd have to be a really good Nicolas Cage.
Mandy.
You know what? Yeah, actually, Mandy was really good. And we haven't done The Vampire's Kiss, which I thought you would do this season for some reason. But
it was on the list.
Yeah.
And then I saw Renfield was coming out. And I thought, okay, I'll switch it to Renfield. But stay tuned. We'll do Vampire's Kiss at some point.
Yeah, because I think that one might actually have some interesting elements to it as a Nicolas Cage performance, from what I've heard.
Oh, you've not seen it?
No, I haven't seen it.
I've heard good things, actually.
Yeah, I don't seek out. I think we've talked about this. I don't seek out Nicolas Cage films.
I do.
All right. Is that it? Are we saying
it is? Done? Yeah.
Okay. So stay tuned. Our next episode, as you may have heard, if you haven't just joined us in the last 5 minutes, we have our season finale coming up, and that is a found footage episode. And surprisingly to me, it seems like many of the films that I chose were found footage. So despite decrying that I am not a found footage fan, it seems that I am a found footage fan, and even that I may have seen more found footage films than Maniac.
And I was the opposite. I thought I'd seen all these ones. I was like, oh, yeah, maybe not.
Crazy.
All right.
Okay, so we'll see you in the aisles.